Hey everyone, and welcome to the Jack of All Trades podcast. I'm your host, Kaylee Musso, and for those of you that might not know, I love to travel. And if you've listened to other episodes where I've talked about travel, you might know that. But I love to travel, and I also have a friend at college that loves to travel, and we both did some traveling over our college winter break. So I thought it would be fun to bring him in here today onto the podcast so we can kind of share our travels and our experiences. So this is another guest episode, which is always my favorite to record. To our guest, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Aidan. If you've listened before, you've probably heard me before because this is my second time here with Kaylee.
How does it feel to be a returner on this podcast? You're the first guest that's come back a second time.
It feels good. Thanks for having me back. Yeah, I'm excited to be here to talk about all things travel.
Yeah, because I know we've talked for hours in the dining hall sometimes about this stuff.
We have, yeah. We'd be sitting there for dinner. It'd take us about 20 minutes to eat our food, and then, we'd be there another hour just talking about travel, or where we've been, or where we want to go, and whatnot, while everybody else just sits and has their other conversations.
Well, the cool thing is, like, you and I have been to some of the same places, so we can kind of relate about some of that stuff. And actually, one of the places you went over winter break, Yellowstone, I've been, but it's been a long time, and I've never been in winter. So I've seen a few pictures, but I specifically haven't really asked you much about it yet because I wanted to hear about it on the podcast.
I'd never been to Yellowstone before until this past January. Seeing it in winter is certainly something. I obviously don't have anything to compare it to other than pictures for what it's like in the summer because I've never been. Although, I would certainly like to go back in summer or spring now and see what it's like in a different season.
Can you briefly explain to everyone that doesn't know what or where Yellowstone is? Like, it's a national park, but you want to just explain what it is?
Yellowstone is one of the national parks. It was actually the first national park, and it's mostly in the state of Wyoming, although there are small parts of it in Idaho and Montana as well. It's generally pretty mountainous compared to what we have back here on the East Coast. Our highest points here on the East Coast are just hills to them out in the Montana, Wyoming area. And it's a pretty big park as well. It's about the same size as the state of Rhode Island and Delaware combined.
I actually didn't know that. I didn't know that it was that exact size.
Yeah, it's pretty close. I mean, if you put those two states together, they would fit inside Yellowstone with a little room to spare.
So when I went, I think this was a trip I took when I was just finishing fourth grade. So it was quite a while ago. I went with my family. We went in the summer. And Yellowstone, it has like hot springs and geysers, and I mean the whole thing is like just a whole pressure system underground, right? That's kind of waiting to blow.
Yes, so we learned that the geothermal activity is what it is all called, whether it's the geysers or the hot springs or whatever the features may be there. And yeah, while we were there, we actually had a couple days where we hired a guide to take us around, and she was able to give us some insight that, millions of years ago, it was a big volcano that had erupted a few times and still technically is a volcano, although there is no real threat in the near future at all. But there is, I want to say it was 2 to 5 miles under the park, depending where you are in the park, there is a massive magma chamber, which is what allows, the geysers to exist and the steam vents to exist and the hot springs and all that.
Which is crazy to think about, like you're just walking around on top of all that stuff. And one of the things that Yellowstone is kind of famous for is the geyser called Old Faithful, which is, I forget how often it not erupts, but goes off or whatever.
Every 15 to 20 minutes.
Oh, is that often? Wow.
That's why it's called Old Faithful.
Yeah, so, and it's like one of the most impressive ones, so it's pretty popular. A lot of people go and see it. But, I mean, when I went, it was summer, and it was very crowded on the walkways all around it. But it was cool to see. When you were there in winter, there's probably a lot less people, so I imagine it would be nice to have it a little more to yourself.
A little background before I talk about Old Faithful. The road system in the park is essentially a big figure eight. There's a north loop and a south loop, as you may know. And in the wintertime, because of the amount of snow they get out there, there's actually very little of the main roads open to the public. So you actually can't get to Old Faithful in your own car in the wintertime. You have to take what's called a snow coach, which is something we did, seeing as we got to Old Faithful.
That sounds cool.
It's essentially about a 20-seat like minibus that's got, 5-foot tall tires on it, basically, that allows you to traverse over the snow easily. They don't plow the roads in the winter that are not publicly accessible. So, these things have to be able to comfortably drive over, at times, feet of snow. Seeing as we had to take that out to Old Faithful, and that was the only way you could get to Old Faithful, there were not many people there. We walked up, and there's this boardwalk that goes all the way around with all the benches and whatnot, and, we were maybe one of 200 people there. There were other people there, as you mentioned, who said in the summertime, it's just mobbed. My personal experience from seeing it, I thought it was kind of underwhelming, personally. I only really thought you could see the steam. You couldn't really see the water, and maybe that's because it was so cold out, so the hot water, just basically became steam, essentially, due to the winter time there. But, I mean, it was cool. I'm glad I saw it, but I certainly would not want to be there in the summer in massive crowds waiting to see it.
Not to say that it's overhyped, because, it was a while ago when I went, and it's very cool, like you said, glad I got to see it, but it might be a little bit overhyped in, like, the amount of people that are there coming to see it. Like, it's very cool, it's impressive, but if you have to fight all those crowds just to see it, would I go back? I don't know.
Yeah, part of it, too, is it's so far out of the way from anything else, too. Yeah, you got to make a trek to get down there. I don't know. It was cool.
One thing that we did is they had a bunch of cabins and stuff and like a lodge. We stayed in one of the cabins, so we were within walking distance to Old Faithful. And actually from our porch, we could see a little, maybe like 3-foot tall spring or geyser that was almost constantly going off from what I remember. So that was kind of cool, but I'm pretty sure we got up earlier and went when it was less crowded. We just walked to it. So I guess maybe that's something I would recommend for people that want to see it when it's less crowded and are there in the summer, is stay actually there in the park at the cabins and walk to it, not in the middle of the day or the peak busy times. But where did you guys stay?
We stayed in a town called Gardner, Montana, which in the wintertime has a population of less than 1,000 people. And this town is about 5 minutes or so from one of the gates to Yellowstone National Park.
Okay, so that's pretty convenient. I don't even know if the cabins or the lodge, I don't know if they're open all year or what, so I don't even know if that would have been an option.
I don't think they are, to the public at least. I know the National Park Service houses people in the park, throughout the park, year-round. But seeing as all the roads into the visitor center and cabins there at Old Faithful are closed in the winter, I doubt, you're getting in there on your own unless there's a tour company that can get you in one of the snow coaches and does a extended, few overnight things. Maybe there is, I don't know.
Yeah, that would make sense. Those snow coaches sound cool, though. Like, I would want to ride in one just for the experience.
They were pretty cool. There were a couple times, as I mentioned, they're going over feet of snow, and, these drivers they know what they're doing, but even with the roads, there were some spots, we were sliding around a little bit, and there were some steep banks down into rivers that, the snow was so high, it was basically you were driving on top of the guardrails. So, better trust your driver.
That's crazy. I don't know. I might be a little bit sketched out at times.
It really wasn't that bad. And the whole time, too, you're in there, they're talking to you about what you're driving past and what animals you might see. And and why these rocks look like this, and why these trees are here and not there. And not only are they taking you where they need to be, but they're giving you pretty cool information the whole time too.
Yeah, what did you see for wildlife in the winter?
So as I mentioned, we had a guide for 2 days. She would come pick us up in the morning from right at our hotel, and then drop us back off at the end of the day. We did 2 back-to-back days with her. One of them was a full day, and then one we did a half day. And the first day was supposed to be like a snowshoeing day, essentially. She was going to take us out. We were going to do a couple snowshoe trails and whatnot. And the second day was supposed to be the wildlife day. However, on the first day, from Gardner to where we were going snowshoeing, it was at least an hour and a half, if not 2-hour ride. And we happened to get lucky and see all sorts of wildlife on the way out. The second day, which was supposed to be our wildlife day, we actually ended up doing some other stuff instead. But in terms of what we actually saw, we saw all 3 of the canine species which are in the park, which is, see if I remember them, fox, wolves, and coyotes. We saw bald eagles. We saw moose. We saw tons of bison, tons of elk, American pronghorn, which are a tiny, kind of funny-looking deer animal. We did see white-tailed deer, which what I found funny is our guide was telling us that the white-tailed deer population in Yellowstone and that part of the country in general is so much lower compared to what it is here on the East Coast. So there are people that go to Yellowstone to try and see white-tailed deer.
And we're so used to seeing them here that it's like, whatever, it's just a deer.
Yeah, we can just look right out into our backyards and see white-tailed deer pretty much whenever we want.
So you probably saw more, I would imagine there'd be more wildlife out and about in winter when there's less people.
I would say you're probably right. A lot of the wildlife we did see was, way far back off the road. The guide we were with, she had binoculars and spotting scopes, but they're essentially a hunting telescope kind of thing. We were seeing animals that were hundreds, if not thousands of feet away, but we were still able to make them out in pretty good detail.
I saw a picture of like a carcass or something. Didn't you guys see something like that?
Yeah, so there was, in one part of the park, there was a bison carcass that was maybe 100, 150 feet or so off the road. That was kind of a hot spot, actually, for the day for wildlife because all the wildlife in the park was coming to feed on it, basically. When we were there, we saw, I think it was 3 coyotes, couple bald eagles, and then just tons of crows as well, just trying to pick away and get what they could.
Interesting. Well, we didn't see that. We saw plenty of bison when we were there, but we did Lamar Valley, which probably was closed when you were there, I would imagine, or at least not drivable.
Nope. Lamar Valley is actually one of the roads that they do plow in the winter.
Oh, that's cool.
And that was actually where the bison carcass was. It was just at one of the ends of Lamar Valley.
That would make sense then, because I think that's where we saw most of the bison, and they would have what they would call animal jams, basically a traffic jam caused by a herd of bison just milling the road, and that did kind of happen to us. We were driving through, and there were places where we were in this low to the ground car at the time, and the bison that was right on the side of the road laying down was almost as tall as our car. The bison was laying down. We were in a car. We were several feet from it, and it was just the most surreal thing. And to have a bison kind of walking down the road and staring you down, like, these are scary creatures if they, choose to get mad. So it was just really interesting to be quite literally driving among them.
When we did our snow coach tour, on the drive back, we had a herd of bison just hanging out in the road that we had to patiently drive behind and wait till they made a gap to go through. And yeah, you mentioned, bison are huge animals. Back here on the East Coast, the biggest kind of animal of that type we get is the moose. These bison are even bigger than moose. We had our guide tell us that fully grown male bison can get up to 2,000 pounds. They can run, they don't look it, but they can run 35 miles an hour, and they have a 6-foot vertical.
What?
Yeah.
They,
So
they can jump?
they can.
Wow.
They're apparently, I thought the same thing too, but they're apparently very agile creatures. So, like you said, you don't want to give one of them a hard time.
No, that's the thing. You really can't when they just go lay down in the middle of the road and decide that that's where they want to be. Like, what can you do? I mean, you can't just make this bison mad and be like, "Hey, I got to get through." You kind of just have to wait it out, which is why they have traffic jams caused by the wildlife, because they do what they want and they own the land.
Yes, they do.
And so you probably didn't get to see any bears because it's hibernation season. But we in Lamar Valley, we got to see bears. I think it would have been black bear. Pretty sure. I don't remember. I could be wrong on that. But we actually saw bear cubs like up in a tree. And then the mom was down somewhere. So I remember we saw bison, we saw bears. I'm sure we saw coyotes and deer and stuff like that too. It's been long enough that I don't remember what else we saw. But those are the things that stood out to me wildlife wise.
Yeah, the bears, as you mentioned, we obviously didn't get a chance to see, as it was the middle of winter, so they were all fast asleep. However, I apparently in the park in the past they have had dens close enough to the road where you can, if you know what you're looking for, you can, sit in your car on the side of the road and watch them, hibernate. Basically, there were none that the park service knew about this winter.
There's a lot of hot springs and stuff that you can go around and see, and I don't know how much was open when you were there, but we went around and saw, I think there was like an emerald hot springs and maybe like a sapphire hot springs, and there was this one called like Old Glory or something. It was supposed to be this really, really colorful, yellow and orange and turquoise, just this deep hot pool of water that is it's called like fading glory now because people throw stuff in there like pennies and stuff, like a wishing well, and then it causes it to lose its color. And I don't know if any of that was open when you were there, but that's stuff that I remember seeing.
No, none of the popular ones were. It's all boardwalks out to see those, basically. And the boardwalks were all covered with snow. They don't clear those in the winter, so we weren't able to walk out to any of those, unfortunately. There was one, however, that you could kind of get a glimpse of from the road. I don't remember what the name of it was, but we were able to see some of the colors. The first kind of big thing you came to in the park, if you came through the gate that was right in Gardner, was called Mammoth Hot Springs. Mammoth Hot Springs actually has a little town built around it, essentially. When the park was first formed, there was no National Park Service, so law enforcement in the park was actually done by the Army. So the Army came in and they set up a base basically at Mammoth Hot Springs. The actual hot spring part of Mammoth Hot Springs, there's it's basically a big kind of step formation that's, it's almost like a waterfall kind of thing. Where there's boardwalks all around this and stairs, and you can climb up and see different things. And it's not like the big pools, but it's almost set up kind of like terraces, and there's just different levels, and the different bacteria in the water causes different colors. None of the colors are as vivid as some of the pools in the park, but this was still cool to see.
Yeah, that name sounds familiar. Now that you're describing it, I do think we went there and got to see it. There's kind of a variation of things to do in the park, and again, because it's so long ago that I went, I kind of forget what was actually in the park and what was just other areas around, because we also did some other things as part of that trip. Mount Rushmore and just some other things, the Badlands, I think, areas around there that were cool to see. But yeah, Mammoth Hot Springs was pretty neat. I do remember that one. I would be interested if it's like in the winter, there's probably a lot more stuff with the steam freezing because it's hot water meeting cold air. So that might make some cool formations or cool stuff.
There was quite a bit of steam off all of the geothermal features, just because you mentioned it is such hot water that's meeting cold air. Sometimes you'd be walking around these things and you just get a cloud of steam right to your face, basically.
I'm trying to remember, I don't know if it was called like the mud pots, but there was something that we got to see that I think was in Yellowstone where it was like, kind of just looked like this pool of sludge and it was bubbling up and like the bubbles were bursting. I think that was in Yellowstone, but that was kind of cool to see.
There are some in Yellowstone, yeah. There was one actually that we were going to make a stop at, but it was like the week or two before we were there. It actually erupted, basically, and our guide told us it threw rocks the size of like grills all over the boardwalk, and it busted the boardwalk, and people were actually like out around this thing when it erupted. Luckily, nobody got seriously hurt or anything, but that was, it just shows that it's ever changing, and you can track it as much as you like, but you never know when something's going to happen.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, just goes to show how unpredictable it still is, because it is geothermal stuff, like you were saying, just moving around under there, so you never know. So just to wrap up about Yellowstone, what was your favorite part, you think, of visiting?
I think my favorite thing we did in Yellowstone was probably the snowshoeing. That was the first time that I've snowshoed. I think we did about 2 miles of it. We kind of had a trail that followed along a river that was partially frozen over and whatnot. I don't know. I mean, I like hiking, so, this is similar to it, I guess, and I just really enjoyed it. But, I mean, everything in the park we saw was cool as well, from the wildlife to the geothermal stuff to just the massive mountains. I'd certainly want to go back and see it in a different season when it's not fully covered in snow.
Yeah, I've been snowshoeing, but never in a national park, so I bet that was cool. And I forgot about the mountains too. I'd imagine that would be, especially snow-covered mountains, I'd imagine that would add to the scenery. So you went from snow to then, Florida? Right after?
Yes, I did, with 1 day in between as a break.
And what'd you do in Florida?
In Florida, I was down visiting family and went to Disney for a day.
Had you been to Disney before that?
I have several times. This was, if I remember, this was time number 9,
Oh, wow.
I think. It's either 8 or 9.
I'd be intrigued to go as an adult. I went when I was in 2nd grade. That's the only time I went to Disney. But I imagine going as an adult. I mean, there's still lots of fun things you can do, but you're just seeing things through like a different perspective,
Yeah, the first time I went as, say, an adult was a few years ago, and there was a little bit of a gap between that time and the time I had went before. When I went a few years ago, from not having seen it for a while to then seeing it again as kind of an adult, it was certainly different. It felt as though, at least for me, that some of the magic wasn't there. And there's still tons of it that is. But it's just, there, you notice like more of the little things. But no, I still love it, and I still, I would still go back in a heartbeat, even though I've seen it and done the stuff 8 or 9 times. There's always new stuff, and it's always changing. There's always new places to eat, and yeah.
Yeah, especially for you and I who are, we have majors at school where we're used to looking at the behind the scenes of production, basically. So I'd imagine that there would be a little bit of just noticing more things like that too when you're looking at the productions and the shows and different things. So you're not looking at it as just an oblivious bystander or kid anymore.
Right, and I mean, even kind of before I came to school, I had that eye for detail and little things, but yeah, I mean, there's certainly more of that at this age.
So you got to go to Florida again. You mentioned you have family there, so you visit a lot. And I know we've talked a little bit about, because we've both been to Florida multiple times, and of course it's always cool. There's always neat things to see, but maybe not the top destination on your travel list anymore, right? Just because it's Florida, And I know some people would kill to go.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've had family in Florida my whole life, so I've been down there well over a dozen times. Usually at least once a year. Some years I've gone down twice. And they're in the Orlando area. So I've done, I won't say I've done a lot in that area, but I've done a decent amount. And as much as I have been to Florida, there's still so much, that I haven't done. I haven't really been to the western portion of the state at all. I haven't been up in the Panhandle. So, I would certainly like to get to those parts at some point. But as you mentioned, there's tons of other places, other states as well that, I think would kind of come a little higher up on my list, seeing as those are places that I've never been at all.
Have you ever been to Everglades National Park in Florida?
I have not, but that's on the list.
Because I went a few years ago. We were taking a cruise out of Florida, and we went to Everglades first. And it was cool, but as someone who has been to a lot of national parks over the years, I wouldn't say that it necessarily would even rank in the top 5, but it's different from a lot of the ones I've been to. And it was cool, but I didn't find it to be particularly overwhelming, awe-inspiring compared to some of the other parks I've been to.
With the national parks, they're just all so different in things to see and how big they are and stuff like that. Eventually I kind of have a goal that I want to get to all the national parks in my lifetime. I think it's 64 of them, 63, something like that. And no, the Everglades is not one I've been to. I've heard mixed things about it. I've heard people say similar to what you said, but I've heard great things about it. That's just not a part of Florida that I've been to before.
Yeah, it's definitely worth seeing. And there's a lot of interesting stuff to see. There's some cool wildlife and whatnot. Obviously, if all the national parks are your goal, then you'll, I'm sure, be hitting that at some point. But speaking of visiting other states, you were talking about other states you want to visit. Have you ever been to Texas?
I have not been to Texas, no.
So I mentioned to you guys listening that I traveled over winter break. One of the places that I spent, I don't know, maybe about 2 weeks in was the state of Texas. It was my first time, and I feel like lately all of the new places I've been going have been overseas. So it's been a while since I've been to a new state that I've never been to. So I was just excited to be exploring a new state, and it was definitely, as a small town girl from Maine, it was a little bit of a culture shock in some areas.
Was everything bigger?
They say everything's bigger in Texas, and there's a lot of that is true. From my perspective.
Yeah.
And I can't say that I would want to go in the summer. Pretty much every single Texan that I talked to while I was there said, do not come in the summer. It's miserable. You're going to hate it. So if they're all saying that and they're used to it, then I really don't think I could. But it was nice in the winter. We got lucky and had really good weather. And we actually, when we were down in San Antonio, it was like a record high 88 or something one of the days. Like, it's not usually that warm that time of year, but because a few weeks later after we left, they got snow and ice. So, but yeah, one difference was like the roads, the highways. You've probably heard, but speed limits are a bit faster in Texas, and
80?
Highways are bigger. Yeah, 75 or 80, but it's also more acceptable to drive like 15 over.
Yeah.
People said they have had cops flying past them, and they were already going 10 over, and the cops were just cruising past them at 15 or 20 over, so way faster. So it's kind of like more stressful. I'm glad I didn't have to drive because it's lots of lanes, really fast, and it's also concrete roads. And also I found that it was so much more of a bumpy ride because, yeah, in the Northeast we have potholes and things like that from the winters, and they don't necessarily have as much of that down there, although they still do, especially on like certain back roads. But on the highways, you're going faster, but the concrete has seams in it every so often too. So I don't know, you're just, the way that you're bumping along, you can't just take a nap in the back seat if you wanted to,
Nope.
it is way too much of a bumpy ride for that. And also their interchange systems, like, getting from one highway to the next and whatever, are actually insane. There's curves going in all directions. There's like 3 different levels and we see a little bit of that in certain places in the Northeast, going through Boston a little bit or different places. But in Texas, they're everywhere and they're so intricate and confusing.
Yeah, I've seen some pictures of some of them, and I'm not sure I'd want to attempt to drive any of them.
Yeah, but also it felt like we had to go on the highway to get pretty much anywhere we wanted to go, even if it was close by, which I'm sure that not every part of Texas is like that, like the really rural parts, but we were near a lot of the bigger cities and highway is how you get to everywhere.
Welcome to the U.S.
Yeah, so we flew into Dallas, Fort Worth, and then we have some friends down there that live in Round Rock, which is within a few hours of Dallas. And so we stayed there. We were there for New Year's Eve. And then we went into Austin for a day. What was crazy about Austin is we were there on New Year's Day and there was like nobody there in the area that we were. It felt so surreal because it was like, this is the quietest big city I feel like I've ever been to. But they said it's not normally like that. Usually it's really busy. We just were in an area of town where there were more businesses that just were closed on New Year's Day and whatnot. But yeah, we saw the Capitol. We walked around. If I go back, I want to do, people were out on kayaks and paddle boards in the river and it looked so relaxing. So I would love to do that.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah, people were the weather was nice and everything. And there wasn't tons of like boat traffic or anything. And it's not a strong current. So you can just rent it and relax on the river with a nice view. So I would totally do that if I went back. But there's also there's a lot of history. And Texas, they have to take their own Texas history class at school. Like they're all required to do that, which makes sense.
Well, they were almost their own country for a little bit.
They've been owned by like 6 different governments or entities or whatever, which is where the name for Six Flags came from, which I actually didn't know.
I didn't know that either.
So, yeah, apparently that's where that originated. But, yeah, so we were with a couple friends. They took us around Austin. And then my family, we went down to San Antonio. And San Antonio is really cool, too. There's a lot of history there. We got to see the Alamo. And I don't know if you've heard of it, but there's a ton of history there. So that was really cool to see. It's a very close walk from the Riverwalk. And I don't know, have you heard anything about the San Antonio Riverwalk?
Nope, nothing.
So I had heard like, oh, you got to do the Riverwalk, do the Riverwalk while you're there. But I didn't really know what I was getting into. But where we stayed at the hotel was kind of right on the Riverwalk, not the commercial part. But so we could just walk out the back door, go down to this river, and then walk along. And then you turn a corner and suddenly you're in this part where it's basically like, think of Venice, Italy. It's like Venice, but some of the Texans actually were like, it's better than Venice because it's way cleaner and classier. But it was beautiful. It's basically, they kind of there's a section of it that's man-made, but they channeled the river into this, pretty narrow river that's 3 or 4 feet deep. And there's walkways on either side, and it's below street level, and there's restaurants and shops, and there's hotels you can stay at, and there's just all kinds of businesses along there. There's little bridges that go up and over, and at Christmas time, which they still had it up when we were there, but they have all these lights in the trees and like long strands of lights hanging down, and it's really beautiful. And the thing is, the walkway on either side, there's no railing. Like it's literally just basically sidewalk, and then if you were to step off the sidewalk, you'd be standing in 3 or 4 feet of water if you're not paying attention, which was kind of unique. They gave us some statistic about how many people, like 300 people a year fall in, and usually on Friday and Saturday nights because people are drunk,
I'm looking at pictures of it right now, and now I want to go see it and walk along it.
It's well worth it.
It looks interesting.
And you got to go at night and during the day because there's pros and cons to both. And we took a boat tour. They have, they're constantly like sending these little boats through, and you get a tour guide that kind of explains about the history of some of the buildings, because there's so much history with that too. And then they even take you out into the little man-made section and around. And so that was really cool to do. We did that during the day. And there's also a little stage at one area, and there's seats across the river from it. So they do performances of some kind there, which I would have loved to see. They didn't do any while we were there, but it was really cool. Just the design of all of it. And there's so many different cultural places. We got really good Mexican food one of the nights. We also went to the Rainforest Cafe, which they have those other places, but that was a really cool experience. But yeah, it's so neat to see. And it really did feel like a mini Venice, but like really clean. Definitely something that's worth seeing. It's kind of like the thing to do in San Antonio. But we also saw the Alamo, and we went up into, it's kind of like the Space Needle in Washington State, but it's called the Tower of the Americas. And it's basically a similar idea. You can go up in it. We were up there, saw the sunset above the city. They have like a little 3D movie theater in there. That was kind of fun.
Yeah, I'm definitely adding San Antonio to my list now.
Yeah, I would say like of places in Texas to go, that's definitely one of them to check off the list. Some of the locals in Texas were saying the problem with Texas is that there are some cool things to see, but they're so spread out from each other. It's like hard to plan a trip and see it all.
Yeah, Texas is a big state.
Yeah. So that was kind of the biggest sightseeing thing we did. Then we came back up and we spent a few days in Sherman, which is where our friend Sam lives. And so we were in that area. And one of those days we popped up into Oklahoma. We actually spent a night in Oklahoma because I had never been. So, got to check it off the list, and so I didn't actually do anything scenic in Oklahoma. My parents took one of the days and did a loop to some things, but there wasn't anything crazy to see. Nothing crazy.
Yeah, just flat farm fields probably.
Yeah, there was some little waterfall that they went to and something, but for the most part, wasn't crazy. The big thing that people go to is the casino. I think it's like the Choctaw Casino or something. It's like, it's a big Oklahoma destination, I guess. So we went just to play some of the games. Like we went bowling, and then we did some air hockey and like some of the other things like that, just to do something in Oklahoma, to make it count.
Yeah.
But no, we also, my parents, at this point, my brother had already flown home, but Sam and my parents and I went to the Fort Worth Stockyards. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
I haven't heard of that either, no.
I hadn't either. So we decided to go check that out. And every day, twice a day, they do a little cattle drive type thing. They have maybe 7 or 8 longhorns. And they are massive, these things. Like their horns sticking out. They have long horns. Yeah. And so they have a bunch of guys on horses, and they kind of do this cattle drive. They close off the street and they go down the street and do it. And there's a lot of really cool stores and shops and restaurants and things like that. But it's a very historical place too. And they tell a little bit of the history before they do the cattle drive. But it used to be like the place that people on their cattle drives would come through here. And there's a lot of history there. So it's a really cool place to see if you're looking for something to do. The problem we ran into was it was winter. And so there were a lot of things that even if we could have done it, they were closed. So when we were in Sherman area and we were like, what should we go and do for a day? There were things that we couldn't really do because it was closed. So that is one thing, I guess, to keep in mind as far as timing of your trip.
We had similar issues like that in Yellowstone for some stuff. With, winter at Yellowstone is obviously very different than winter in Texas. But I mentioned the town Gardner that we stayed in. They had half a dozen restaurants and half a dozen shops closed in the winter because all their traffic is summertime, and it just doesn't make sense for them to stay open year round. And even the park itself, I just feel like there's a ton we didn't see because we did go in the winter, but it just means I got to go back.
Exactly. But then there's always a dilemma of, do you go back or do you go find some new place?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And speaking of new places, this is the last question I'll ask for today. Do you have any trips planned coming up? What's your next on the travel agenda?
We've been talking about England for a while. We've also been talking about doing a sort of Midwest road trip kind of thing to hit 6 or 7 different states. Both are in the early planning stages still, but if I had to guess, we would do the stateside trip before we made the trip across the pond, but we'll see.
Yeah, there's more places in England I would want to go back to, so it'll be interesting to see what you guys choose to do when you go.
Yeah, I mean, we've done Ireland, but did not go down to England when we were there, and I mean, there's just so much to do there, and we've been slowly trying to figure it out, but we'll see.
Yeah, well, that'll be cool, and I'll look forward to hearing about those too. My next big trip is to Germany with my brother and cousin. So we're kind of in the planning of that. But we have all our trains and Airbnbs and flights booked now. That'll be in May. And my next little trip is in just a few weekends to New York City. I'm going to be seeing my first Broadway show. Actually, none of my family has ever seen a Broadway show. It was a Christmas present for my mom because she's been really wanting to go. But, I mean, we're all going. And then I think we might go to the Natural History Museum. And we have basically like a day and a half or something in the city. So it'll be interesting. I have been to New York City before, and you have too. But
yeah, I've been enough.
Yeah.
I don't need to go back.
I mean, I'm at the point where I'm like, I'll go for a specific purpose because I've done my New York City trip of just sightseeing all the things. So now it's like if I go, I'm going for a reason, not just to go and wander around. But yeah, that'll be exciting. We'll definitely have to do another travel themed episode at some point, but thanks for joining me and hope you had fun today.
Yeah, thanks for having me back again. I did, and yeah, always open to do more in the future.
Yeah, you might become like the most frequent guest.
Maybe. We'll have to see.
All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for now. So I hope that everyone listening enjoyed the episode, and make sure and share it with your friends, or comment below if you've been to any of the places we've talked about, or if you want to go. And I hope you guys have a great day and a great week, a great weekend, whenever you're listening to this, and I'll talk to you next time.